As our application or team grows, managing global state with the provide and inject APIs can become more challenging. Vuex is a state management solution that helps us overcome these challenges. An application state is how it synchronizes data among its components. There are two main types of state. Local state is the data we manage inside a component that only affects that component. An example would be a menu that's activated with a button. Global state is data that affects multiple components or an entire application. An example would be a user's authentication status. While the provide and inject APIs give us an easy way to manage cross-component state, they do have some drawbacks. A component can quickly become bloated with data that's not necessary for its template, but for other components. Also, it's not always immediately obvious where a certain component state is changed. This can lead to unpredictable behavior, especially within a team of developers. This unpredictable behavior is error-prone, because a developer can accidentally update the wrong state or miss an important update to a state. This is where Vuex helps us manage our state. It detaches the state from a component and manages it in a different place, so components can't become bloated with unnecessary data. It's more predictable because there are clear rules to how state should be managed, updated, and synced. That predictability makes it less error-prone because we have a clearly defined data flow through the application. We can set up the Vuex package in multiple ways. We can install it into an existing project with npm. Or, we can add it when we scaffold a new project with the CLI. We'll install it manually with npm to start, then cover how to include it with a new project at the end of the lesson. To install the package manually, open a new terminal by going up to Terminal in the top menu bar. From there, type npm install vuex at next -- save. The save flag tells npm that we want the plugin to be installed as a runtime dependency instead of a dev dependency. Once the package has been installed, we'll be able to see it in the package.json file. Every Vuex application has a store, which is essentially just a container that holds the application state. It's similar to a global object, but with a couple of important differences. A Vuex store is reactive. It will reactively update a store's state when a component retrieves from it. And a store state cannot be mutated directly. It must be done explicitly, which ensures that every state has a record and can be tracked. In this lesson, we're going to create our store directly in the main.js file. Then, in the next one, we'll show you how to use Vuex modules to separate and organize your store. Let's start by importing the createStore method from the Vuex package. The createStore method takes a config object as an argument with at least one option, called state. The state option is a method that contains the entire state of the application. It returns a state object in the special store.state instance variable. The final step in the setup is to tell Vue we want to use the store on the app. Now we're set up and ready to start using Vuex. The state method is like a global version of the data method. So, we can add any data properties to it that we want to be available to the entire application. We'll create a simple counter property with an initial value of 0. The counter property can then be accessed in any component in our app by using the special $store.state instance variable. We'll render our counter to the template and set up a method to increment it with a button. If we go to the browser and click on the button, the counter increments. We didn't have to inject anything or pass props to the root app component. To expand on the example, we've created a component in the Components folder called Increment Counter. Its only job is to increment the counter. So, inside it, we have the same logic we have in the root app component. Because the new component increments the counter, we can replace the method in the root app component with increment counter. If we go to the browser and click on the button, everything still works as expected. It should be noted that store properties shouldn't be used to replace any props we pass to a component's children. A good rule of thumb is to only use them where you would normally use provide and inject. At the moment, we're directly communicating with our components, which isn't ideal. We can still introduce mistakes and unexpected behavior into our application. As an example, let's consider that we want to increment the counter in another component, but with a different mechanism, like a mouse over. If we ever change the way the counter increments, we have to do it in multiple places, which can lead to mistakes or code duplication. The ideal way would be to have the increment method in a single place, then allow any component to implement it. Vuex allows us to define such methods in the mutations option of the store, which is the global equivalent of the methods option that we usually define in a component's config object. The method we define will automatically receive the state object as a parameter. We can use it, instead of the this keyword, to reference the data from the state method. To access the mutation in a component, we specify its name as a string argument in the special $store.commit method. If we head over to the browser and click the button, the counter will increment. Now, if we ever need to modify the incrementing behavior, we only have to do it in one place. It should be noted that all mutations must be synchronous. If we need to perform an asynchronous task, we use actions before invoking mutations. We'll cover actions in a bit. First, let's see how to pass data to a mutation with payloads. We want to keep state changes in a single place as much as possible, but sometimes we may need to pass data to a mutation method. Vuex allows us to do that with a second payload parameter, which is essentially the same as a regular parameter. The mutation method call will now be able to accept a second argument. Our mutation expects a number, so we'll pass in something like 10. If we go to the browser and click the button, the number will increment by 10. Just as we don't directly change the state from outside the store, we shouldn't directly retrieve data from the state. Vuex allows us to fetch data indirectly with getter methods in the getters option of the store. The method we define will also automatically receive the state object as the first parameter. We can then reference the getter method through the special $store.getters instance variable. If we run the example in the browser, we'll see the counter value above the button. So, it still works as it should, but now we're getting the value through a getter. Getter methods can also automatically receive an optional second parameter, the getters object. The object gives us access to all the other getter methods in the getters option, allowing us to use their returned values in our logic. As an example, let's say we have a second getter method that should limit the counter value. So, we can use the getter object to get the output from getCounter, then limit the value to 50. Note that because it doesn't have a default value, we'll always have to pass the state parameter to the method first, even if we don't use it. To complete the demonstration, we'll render our new normalized counter in the root app components template. If we go to the browser and click on the button, the normalized counter will stop when it reaches 50. As mentioned earlier, mutations must always be synchronous. It should only ever be able to update the latest state. If we run asynchronous code in a mutation, another mutation could change the data before the async operation completes and give it the wrong values. Actions allow us to perform async operations before a mutation is invoked. An action is just a method in the actions option of the store. It'll automatically receive the context parameter, which also has a commit method that we use to invoke a mutation. If the mutation receives a payload, it's specified when we commit the mutation in the action method. As a quick tip, we can, and should, name our action methods the same as the mutation they're invoking. It makes it easier to see at a glance which action is connected to a mutation. To invoke an action, we use the dispatch method on the store instance object. The method accepts the action name as a string argument, and any payload we need to pass to the mutation as an optional second argument. If we go to the browser and click on the button, everything will work as expected, and the counter will increment by 10. An action will automatically receive the payload as an optional second parameter. We can forward that payload so that we'll be able to accept it in the dispatch method, where the action is invoked. To demonstrate, let's add the payload parameter to our action, where we previously specified a value. The dispatch method will then accept a value for the payload as a second parameter. We'll do a different number this time, like 5. If we run the example in the browser and click on the button, the counter will increment by 5. Now that we know the core features of the Vuex library, let's discuss some of its utility features. Vuex makes our lives a little easier by providing us with two convenience methods, namely map getters and map actions. These methods automatically map getters and actions so that we don't have to create them manually. At the moment, we output our counter property by tapping directly into the store. A more ideal way to do this would be to use a computed property. Instead of creating a computed property for each getter we have, Vuex can do it for us with the map getters method. This method will automatically define our getters as computed properties and return them as an object. To use the method, we import it from the Vuex package, then spread it in the computed option with JavaScript spread syntax. To ensure we don't have unnecessary getters, the method takes an array of getters we want to turn into computed properties as an argument. If we go to the browser and click on the button, everything will still work as expected. Mappers save us a lot of time and code, and ensures we don't make any mistakes when defining our computed properties. At the moment, we dispatch our increment action through the increment counter method in the methods option. Similar to getters, Vuex allows us to map our actions with the map actions method. It works the same as the map getters method, but we spread map actions in the methods option instead. But this example won't work because our action requires a payload. If that's the case, we specify the payload where we invoke the action in the template. For us, that would be the click handler on the button. If we go to the browser and click on the button, the counter will increment by 3. So everything still works as expected, but with less code and fewer chances of making mistakes. The Vue CLI allows us to add the Vuex package when we scaffold a new project. In the first step, where we need to pick a preset, we want to manually select features. In the feature step, we can select Vuex. Then, of course, we want to use Vue 3. The rest of the options aren't related to this demonstration, so you can pick the ones you want. When the CLI scaffolds the new project, it'll set up a store in the store directory and register it in the application's config. In the next video, we'll learn how to organize a store with Vuex modules. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.